We've gone through a lot of evolutions in the marketing industry. I remember back when, sorry, I'm really sick, but I want to do this. So I'm going to do this and then go to bed. Uh, I remember back in the Michael Jordan era. So the company I was working for did the Michael Jordan event for Quaker. It was Gatorade, basically owned by Quaker at the time, and we worked for the CMO of Gatorade. And the personality of Michael Jordan, the attractive character, let's say, of Michael Jordan, moved a lot of Gatorade. I also remember uh, um, with my distribution business, which is separate from this example, Nike, we were selling products into a variety of retail channels, and I was selling Reebok, the kid stuff. It was called Weebok, believe it or not. And I was at a Milwaukee Brewers game. We had an account in Milwaukee. They had about 15 locations, shoe stores, and we got the children's products in there, children's clothes, children's shoes, the whole thing. And I sat next to the Nike sales rep. This guy had a swoosh tattooed on his ankle and cool sunglasses on. He was super arrogant, because they're Nike and we're Reebok, but Nike was hot. So I worked in the product market. So in the product market, and I went to trade shows in Vegas. There was one called Magic, and it was Magic, and Snoop Dogg's there, and all the celebrity attractive characters. And there were brands like from Sean John, Rockaware, which was Jay-Z, I think. It was a long time. And we were repping a brand. This was my company called Mecca, which was, for a sales rep, sales distribution company, it's hard to get these big brands, but we had Tommy Hilfiger. So, I was pretty successful with those kinds of things. Now, we've been in this world of attractive characters for a long time. And I remember noticing back in 2020, 2019, 2020, coming online and learning about storytelling and marketing. So Russell Brunson's attractive character approach, I tried that. I went through all the story brand work, and I understood story brand from a business standpoint. I saw it as a way to revitalize the website development industry, because so many of those companies, and I'd worked with a bunch of them, done sales for them, they were really drowning because they were commoditized. I had a friend who had a business. They did websites. They got up to about $1 million in revenue, like 950,000 in annual revenue. And his business started falling apart because it became commoditized building a website. So then the idea of building a story brand for your clients and licensing that from Donald Miller, essentially not really licensing it, but learning the method, gave him a really good distribution channel. And I took a course called The Business of Story, which was corporate. I forget the guy's name, but it was very good. And I'm looking at this power of story, and then you can take it back to the direct response marketing industry too. Mad Men, well, not Mad Men, sorry, Ron Popeil, Tony the Tiger, in Madison Avenue, and then funnels start replacing websites. And there's storytelling and product hero stories now related to personalities and people, but they didn't have the same accomplishments as a Michael Jordan. But it did work, and we moved into an era, and I think it started with Paris Hilton and all these reality shows where you didn't have to have an accomplishment, you just had to be good at marketing. And it surprised me, but it worked. But not for me, but I saw it work for a lot of people. And then the idea of, okay, I get it, because if you make the customer the hero, so Russell Brunson's approach is called the Epiphany Bridge approach. Donald Miller's the story brand approach. You make the customer the hero and they start to get it. So it's not about you being the hero or me being the hero, because they want a different kind of accomplishment. But you can have an accomplishment if you're in your market and you're one of the celebrities. So I thought this was also kind of interesting, where every market has celebrities. I remember being at when Google was kind of taking off. I went to a lot of Google events, conferences, and in that industry, Internet Retailers, Shop.org. Went to Google's headquarters, tried to developed a partnership with their Chicago office, spoke up at 3M. Didn't really go anywhere because of the structure of the partnership. So I don't want to claim that because but I made it happen. So that's an accomplishment, considering that's such a big opportunity. And what I noticed here is that industry had celebrities. So there were people at those SEO conferences. Everybody followed a guy by the name of Rand Fishkin. He was the celebrity because he's teaching people how not to get crushed by Google. So a lot of the what's called SEO community, search engine optimization community, is trying to help their clients working in agencies not get delisted by Google, not get crushed by Google, provide what they called back then valuable content. So this stuff wasn't new. It's just a recombination of it in the online world. And when something works, it takes off, of course. So people at that time started forming different kinds of philosophies around this. So there's a guy named Joe Pulisi, who wrote a book called Content Inc. And for me, I didn't read that one until later, but the thing that really got me was HubSpot. I was fascinated with HubSpot when that came out. And I thought, this is the answer to my problem. My problem was I was outbound and I wanted to be inbound. And I realized there wasn't a shift from outbound to inbound. There was a shift to both together. And I moved down the road of what today is called revenue generation. And I even trademarked the term agile revenue generation, which we don't use because you're not really telling your customer story. You're telling inside baseball story, which is not anymore. I don't care anymore, but it was exciting to me at the time as I was figuring this all out. So the question to me is always what's next? Because when something blows up big, you've got a few years of a run on it. And I saw this with consumer products. Now you have a fad, which is a year, maybe if you're lucky. And you also can have a trend. Now a trend can go on for a long time. So think about the difference between a fad and a trend. A fad would be something like Swatch, or Benetton even. You could look at Benetton as a fad. It went on for a few years, but it didn't last. But then there's other things that did last for a very long time. Something like Nautica, or if you look at Amazon, nobody could say Amazon's a fad. It's a trend, but that doesn't mean it's going to go on forever. Trends never last forever, ever. Sears, catalogs, and then their stores was a trend that lasted a long time. It was an invention, a reinvention of small town retail. So somebody in a small town could get anything they wanted. The catalog showed up and they placed the order and you could buy anything. Well, they didn't have that before. But over time, the technology changes. Then you have cars, you have more cities. So it doesn't last forever. Look at Blockbuster Video. Hot, and then now it wasn't a fad, it was a trend. And then Netflix shows up and everybody got sick of the late fees. Well, why did you have late fees at Blockbuster? Because I think it was like 30-40% of their revenue. So they're focused on that. They were focused on what they had, not what was next. So the conversation I want to have in the Red Pill Labs, which I'm going to be running September 5th at 11 Eastern, 10 Central. So if you're interested, go to the site here and you can register, and we'll publicize this a bit. But I want to have people, if you're a marketer, a branding expert, story brand, or even if you don't, but you're doing it and you have some experience in it, or you're just interested in it, I want to have a conversation about this because Red Pill Labs is about what's next. So I have two things I'm doing. Entre X Forum is about what's going on now. How do you do the story brand stuff? How do you do storytelling? How do you do your Epiphany Bridge stuff? Or not at all? What else are you doing? So it's concrete. It's like, okay, this is what's going on. Red Pill Labs, which will be the alternative weeks, is what's next. We don't know what's next, but we can see the trend forming. You could see fads forming too, but you don't know if it's a trend or a fad for a while. In today's marketplace, being on the trend is important because with technology and the way that things can blow up so quick, it ends. So I remember LinkedIn on 2021, it was all social selling, and then into 2022, building your authority brand, and it died, but not for people who are doing it. So these echo chambers exist now. So the LinkedIn celebrities, and there's celebrities like Luke Matthews is a celebrity on LinkedIn content. And if you look at his feed, it's a bunch of content people that want to be content marketers like him. So it's an echo chamber. And that's going to go on for a while and then implode because somebody like I'm forgetting your name, Dina Kalakovich. So brilliant, attractive, not attractive character, brilliant authority marketer that understands content and social media, blew up big, made a ton of money, and was able to get a huge following of other people who want to learn how to do content marketing like her. So there's a trend in that, but as it explodes out into the marketplace, it starts to over time um, peter out. And the kind of people like this, like a Shay Rowbottom, who I was actually in her boot camp, she moved on. So I look at her now and I'm like, oh, she's moved into what I see coming, which is the experience sharing approach. So experience sharing is removing the marketing intent where you're thinking, how do I persuade people? How do I teach them marketing? She's not doing that right now. She's talking about her inner experience and her experience of figuring out her business. And I call that build it in public. And I saw that in 2020 and I wanted to do it and I started doing that. But it was hard for me to do it because I didn't get myself yet. I was just trying to figure out how to win and make money. And I saw a guy named Jake Dunlap and a couple others, and they were crushing it doing that. And a guy named Colin Cadmos, who did experience sharing. Jackie Hermes did experience sharing, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. But they weren't marketing or selling content. So they were already in what's next back in like 2019, 2020. So the market splits and the smaller market's in what's next. And then the mass market is doing the playbook that's been around for a long time. And there's a 2.0, a 3.0, a 4.0 sequels. So we see this now with Tony Robbins, I think, and Russell Brunson. They're sequels and they're going to work. It's going to work. People are going to go. There's a guy who did this thing called the Sideways Sales Letter and the Launch Formula that's launching his new thing again, which is basically now making what he's already done efficient using AI. So more beginners can do it. And I look at it and I'm like, he's going to sell a ton of that stuff. I forget his name, but I worked through his whole program way back, and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm not built to do these kinds of architectures. And then I started realizing I don't think it would work for me anyways, because so many people have done it. Now, I'm not saying it won't work for you, and I know it's working for him. And I looked at how he did it, and I thought, oh my God, I got the answer from him. I read the stories, Joe Polish's story. I read this guy's story. I can't remember his name. I'll get it in a minute. He figured out something important. He said, how does Hollywood roll out a movie? That's his program. How does Hollywood roll out a movie? So I'm using that. I'm thinking, how does Hollywood roll out a movie? You get on people's stages, and I'm not going to do that, but I won't get into those details, but keeping it at a high level, the concept that this guy figured out with this product launch formula, he called it PLM, I think, product launch, or I forget. But his ads are all over because he has the money. He has the media dollars. So look at that's interesting too, right? When you see somebody spending a ton of money on media, it means they have the money. And that comes from the playbook of a guy by the name of Dan Kennedy. And Russell Brunson's mastered this too, the idea of whoever can spend the most on media wins. And then you get your customers to pay for the media. Well, doing a media buy is hard. I used to be in meetings with people from Starcom, and these people are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on media, and they had a whole team. They had analytics people. I sold them software, AI software, to optimize their bids, and they had so many people involved in these projects. It's so hard to allocate resources across a media buy unless you're really good and you got your attractive character stuff down and you've got your product launch. Jeff Walker, his name's Jeff Walker. So Jeff Walker is a genius and an entrepreneur, and he figured out this, let's roll it out like Hollywood. Well, you don't do that like overnight. They'll start years early, and they infiltrate like Art of War style. It's David, with the slingshot against Goliath. They'll bring that movie out into the talk shows and online, and they'll put up the trailers and they'll test everything. and they'll make sure, wow, we got it right. And they'll think, who's our customer for this? Places like Netflix, for example, they've mastered this stuff. And that's a tough business, streaming. And Netflix and Amazon are the only two streaming companies I read that make money. These other ones don't make any money. They lose money for their owners because you have to get, I think, to 70 million subscribing customers. So I'm looking at that and I'm like, I'm not going in the streaming business. If I ran a corporation, which I don't, I wouldn't go in the streaming business. I would think, what's next? And then I would think about my product and what do I have? So some of those Hulus and um, who else? Now Apple TV's figuring it out. They can fund it because it's Apple. So they're going to find a niche, I think, because they're playing a different game. They're thinking about how do we do this differently. At least I'm not an expert in this industry, but I've been reading about it because I'm curious how it works. So how do you learn about what's next? So the premise for the Red Pill Labs is markets will divide into two segments. And I think we already see this happening. And I remember years ago when we were selling retail, it happened. So what you had, and this crushed my business, it was not good for me. So we had a mass market in the Midwest. So you had what were called junior department stores. You had single location family department stores that sold clothing. You had mom and dad, mom and daughter teams, and they would come in and they drop 100 grand with us in sale. And I'd be like, how do you sell all this in Decatur, Illinois? How do you sell all this in Northern Indiana? And they just looked at me and they're like, you're an asshole, Chicago asshole. They're like, come to the store. And I started doing that. I did it earlier, but it took me a while to learn. And I went all over, I traveled all over the Midwest. I went in the hood, Detroit, to understand those markets, Cleveland, Chicago, Gary, Indiana, all these places, Chicago, Northwest Side, the Korean stores, because I sold a lot of Korean stores too. I'm trying to understand, how does this work? And it's incredible, but it's all gone now. I don't think you can do it anymore this way. So being a local regional sales rep, we had like 15 states and we made a ton of money, and we were the top company in the country doing the things the way we did because I modernized it I was copying basically what distribution companies do. I was trying to figure out how distribution companies succeed in these marketplaces because my market was all mom and pops. My dad and my mom and my grandma ran this. And when I started, it was that. So it wasn't going to go anywhere. It was at the mercy of the market and the buyers. So the point of this is, as the market's divided into segments, what I saw was a higher end boutique segment in the cities. So we were selling 100 grand to people who were wealthy. They didn't need to sell anything. And I didn't know that at first. But I'm like, why are you buying so much stuff? They were buying for their friends. So I'm going to give you a name. You ever heard of Archer Daniels Midland? Our customer was Daniels' daughters. They had an unlimited amount of money to operate a children's store. It wasn't a problem. And I could go on and on with those stories. Mrs. Otis, if you've ever heard of Otis Elevator Company in Winnetka, she lived in Winnetka and she had a children's store there. That stuff disappeared. So the market shifted. I worked at my relatives owned a company called the Fell Company in Highland Park in Winnetka. And, I used to do the grunt work. That's how I started in a way. I did all kinds of stuff, but, I worked in restaurants. I was a bit dishwasher, busboy, and it's different back then. But I stocked the denim and the corduroy wall. And they were really smart where they would buy unwashed Levi's and we would bring them to the laundromats in Highwood near Highland Park, get them washed. I did it with one of the owners of Fells, one of the kids, and then I would stock the wall. I'd have to fold them, and it'd be gone in like a week. I'm like, oh my god. He's like, yeah, it's back to school. Every family in the community shopped there, and they didn't use credit cards. They had house accounts. They said, well, you want to put it on your house account? And they would sign, and my Aunt Reva would send him a bill every month. They didn't pay, you didn't go back. She wouldn't listen to any excuses like my grandmother who did collections for our business. You don't pay, it's it. You may be one more chance if you beg, but I think you could pay cash this time. No checks, no credit cards for sure. So this was what it was like. So I didn't care about the business at all. I just wanted to make enough money to have a lifestyle business. And I was not some spoiled kid. I was not. I worked my ass off and I built that thing. I put it on my back because I wanted to go travel around the world and have fun. I didn't care about the business at all. That's why we succeeded. I just did it. I didn't focus on how to succeed in all these programs that we have today, which I have recently because I want to understand how they work and figure out if I can make them work because that business is gone. I left it. I had to close it. Why? Because the market split in half. So Nordstrom, we sold a lot to Nordstrom. They have a regional buying approach, but they were starting to cut out the middleman like us. They go to New York to buy, and we could help them. So we provided a useful service, but after a while that started to get hard. And then the boutique stores came in and they didn't want to buy from us because they knew, sort of like what happens with this marketing stuff. It's the same thing. It's just not online. But they knew, they came into my showroom and everything they bought would be up and down the street. It's like buying a Curves franchise back in the day. That didn't last either. So everyone's buying the same thing and they would get mad. Well, then they just stopped coming in. What did they do instead? They went to Paris, they went to New York, they went to San Francisco, they went to Dallas. They left the regional markets. So my business was going to collapse and I left it. I took the money. I was like, I got 2 years of receivables here to live off of and figure out what to do next. So I looked at what's next instead of what was. And I remember one of the other sales reps, he's like, you can't do that. You're never going to, what are you going to do? Become a financial advisor? One of the guys did that. He became a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch and he closed the business, but he didn't have a choice. He had one product line and they went under. I had a lot. I had a business. It wasn't just a sales rep for one or two products. I had a business. We had 15, 20, 30 product lines. So I diversified. A lot of people didn't because they get a hot product line and it was a trend and they could go on for years. People thought that would last forever. They really did. I did. And it didn't. And it doesn't. It never will. Nothing lasts forever. Everything is a fad. You can make a lot of money on a fad. Like eBay was a fad, I think. eBay was not a trend. You can't build a business on eBay, but a lot of people tried and some of them made money and then some didn't and they had to get out. We got a lot of that going on right now. You got to look, is it a fad or a trend? If it's a trend, look at how long you can ride it. Surf that wave, get good at it, master it. I saw a lot of people make a lot of money on LinkedIn in the content marketing days when you could do that with content marketing and with HubSpot, when you could do that with content marketing. Now, some people still can, but they're the top people. It's hard for other people to crack in unless you're a natural copywriter or you're a natural influencer personality or you have some talent in that domain. Then you can certainly do it. I'm not saying these things are over. I'm just saying they're not what's next. Now, am I wrong? I don't know. How can I know? That's why we're doing Red Pill Labs. Let's talk about it because other people are going to disagree with me. They're going to say, no, this will go on forever. I don't think that many will. But if you do, come and provide your perspective. It's welcomed. So how will the market split? So we split into in this children's clothing product market. It's split into high end, but not. We imported European products that were it was like $80 for a baby gift. And I think that was wholesale with some of this stuff. And we sold it in Chicago, Minneapolis. Some of these people have an unlimited amount of money. So those European imports did pretty well, but you didn't sell a lot of customers, but we made a lot of money on European imports. So that was okay. So that slice was good. The really weird, strange ones didn't sell though, because it's kind of conservative. That worked more on the West Coast, like in LA or New York, but not where I live. And then we had what we called boutique, which were a lot of designers from California, San Francisco, and they had great stuff. And they were priced for the I would call suburban wealthy. So these are people in like the suburbs of New Jersey or Chicago or Toledo, even not as much, or Cleveland, a lot in Cleveland, a lot in Detroit. Detroit suburbs have a lot of money. Indianapolis, Carmel, Indiana. It's not Carmel. That's California. They bought a ton of this stuff. However, those boutiques started to realize don't buy it from Larry's company because it's going to be everywhere. Because I sold everybody I could. I give you an exclusive on part of the line. I'd say you buy this one and I won't sell it to your competitor. Every once in a while we'd screw up though, and it wasn't my fault. It was the competitor went to Dallas or New York to buy it. And I'd have to tell my customer, well, there's nothing I can do about it because the manufacturer's not going to listen to me because that other client was a better client. And that was the wake up call of I got to get out because the manufacturers no longer, before the manufacturers, we ran the market for the manufacturers. We had power in the distribution channel. And then it shifted to the retailer. And once it shifts to the retailer, the manufacturers get desperate because they start really looking at the numbers because their businesses are tight unless they're celebrities. Every once in a while, you get a celebrity. Now, this is kind of a funny name, but there was one called Flap Doodles. And this guy he came up with something new and they loved it. The consumers loved it. So all of a sudden, these kids girls from 5 to like 8, 10 years old have got to have it. It turned out to be a fad. It only lasted a few years. And one of our clients did 90% of her store in it and then went under in a couple of years because it got old. And she had money. Her husband owned a carpet company. So, and she was super corporate. And but she could lose the money. It wasn't a big deal to them. I don't know. It might have been, but it didn't seem like they cared. She cared a lot about being right and succeeding, but she missed it. And we had a company like that too. It was called Zoodles. And my dad said that put my brother through medical school. Zoodles. Believe it or not, I'm driving around the Midwest selling this stuff to people. I hated it, but I liked the figuring it out part, making it go, figure out what's next, and build the entire infrastructure for this distribution company. It was a lot of fun for me. But what I really liked was not have to work for a month or two. And I liked being in charge, and I liked hiring a team and not having to deal with a lot of stuff I didn't want to do. So I figured that out when I was in my 20s. Nobody gave that to me. I created it. And that's what you got to do as somebody in the marketplace. It's so we do a product development call every day called More Money Now. It's not about how to chase business or succeed on LinkedIn or make cold calls or network. It's not. It's product development in the market with a strategy that'll get you business. And this becomes really important because as these markets split into Walmart, Target on the low end and up, with Target being, middle high. The middle goes away. Carson's, Macy's, we just watched it collapse. Nordstrom did well, kind of upper middle, but middle. They do both. They can play both. Whole Foods can play both with private label. People call it whole paycheck. That house brand is not expensive. You can go to Mariano's in Chicago and it's more expensive for some of those things. Not everybody knows that, but they're playing both sides with private label. Now I won't even get into private label because that also crushed my business. They used to take pictures of the clothes and never buy anything. And I've talked to one of my manufacturers and I'm like, what is going on here? He said, they're knocking it off. Don't go back. So I'm trying to sell these big chains and they're just taking pictures and then they'd send it to China and knock it off. We're there right now, I think. That's the trend. That's the trend. So how many people have knocked off Russell Brunson? How many people have knocked off the product launch formula? How many people have knocked off Story Brand by Donald Miller? A lot of them. Where's that going? Down market. Is there a business down market? Of course there is, always. Walmart's huge because it serves an important need. We had a lot of agricultural customers. They lived in small towns. And I was always like, well, how do you do this? On the farm, you're coming and you're buying. You're going to, they'd have stores in there was like The small towns have hubs. So they'll go to like, Davenport, Iowa from all over the region. They're little hubs. Chicago's the capital of the Midwest. This is the same thing, just broken out. Well, Walmart serves those markets, and we had accounts in all those markets, and they served them until it all went out of business. This is a tragedy to me. This is a political tragedy. The economic class in the United States let this happen, and there's nothing I can do about it. But for me, it worked because I got out. Um, I'm going to go to bed. Hopefully, this was helpful for somebody.